Charles Darwin. What did he do to creation? In the early 19th century, the world often imagined itself as settled. Life was widely understood as fixed, carefully ordered, and unchanging. Every creature seemed to have its place, every form its purpose, and at the center of it all stood humanity, distinct, intentional, and set apart from the rest of nature. It was a reassuring picture, rooted in both scientific tradition and religious belief. And then quietly, almost reluctantly, one man began to look at that picture differently. Charles Darwin was not an obvious revolutionary. He was not a fiery speaker, nor a man drawn to public confrontation. Even his own father once doubted that he would amount to much, seeing more enthusiasm than direction in his interests. But Darwin possessed something far more dangerous than confidence. He had patience, he had discipline, and he had an unusual ability to notice what others passed by. Where many saw stability, Darwin began to see patterns. Where others saw order as final, he began to suspect it might be the result of something deeper, something still unfolding. At the age of 22, Darwin was offered a place aboard HMS Beagle, a British surveying voyage that would circle much of the globe. It was a serious opportunity, but not an obvious path to greatness. His father initially opposed the journey, seeing it as another distraction from a respectable career. Yet Darwin went, stepping into a voyage that would slowly, almost invisibly, transform the way human beings understood life itself. From the beginning, the journey was difficult. Darwin suffered badly from seasickness and was often physically miserable. But discomfort did not dull his curiosity. Wherever the Beagle stopped, he observed relentlessly. He collected specimens, examined fossils, studied rock formations, and compared living creatures across different regions. He was not chasing a grand theory, not yet. He was gathering fragments, details, irregularities. And over time, those fragments began to form a pattern. In South America, Darwin found fossils of enormous extinct mammals that seemed strangely connected to living animals in the same region. On the Galápagos Islands, he encountered creatures that looked closely related, yet differed in subtle ways from island to island. These were not dramatic differences at first glance. They were small, easy to dismiss, but they appeared again and again. Slight shifts in form, slight changes in structure, variations that seemed linked to environment, isolation, and way of life. The pattern was unsettling because it suggested something far more radical than simple design. It suggested history. It suggested change. Gradually, a question began to take hold. What if species were not fixed? What if they were not permanent forms, created once and left unchanged? What if life, instead, was shaped over vast stretches of time-altered generation by generation through a continuous natural process? It was a quiet idea at first, almost fragile, but its implications were enormous. If species could change, then the boundaries between them were less absolute than people had imagined. And if that was true, then humanity itself was no longer safely sealed off from the rest of nature. When Darwin returned to England, he did not rush into print. He did not announce a revolution. Instead, he spent years working with extraordinary caution. He studied, compared, corresponded, experimented, and gathered evidence on a massive scale. He knew the argument forming in his mind was not a small one. It would challenge inherited assumptions about nature, creation, and the special place of human beings in the world. So he moved carefully, building not just a theory, but a case strong enough to endure attack. During these years, Darwin's life was marked not only by scientific labor, but by private sorrow. In 1851, his beloved daughter Annie became ill and died at the age of 10. Her death devastated him. It did not create all of his intellectual doubts, but it deepened questions he was already wrestling with. Questions about suffering, design, and the apparent indifference of the natural world. For a man already studying struggle, variation, and death in nature, the loss was not just personal. It sharpened the emotional weight of the world he was trying to understand. Still, Darwin hesitated to publish his full theory. He shared ideas with trusted friends, but he kept refining the argument, adding evidence, anticipating objections. Then, in 1858, everything changed. A letter arrived from Alfred Russel Wallace, a naturalist working in the Malay archipelago. Inside was an essay outlining a theory of species change through natural processes, and it closely paralleled Darwin's own thinking. After more than 20 years of work, Darwin was suddenly faced with a harsh reality. The idea he had developed so carefully was no longer his alone. That moment forced action. In 1858, the ideas of Darwin and Wallace were presented jointly to the Linnean Society in London. Then, in 1859, Darwin published On the Origin of Species. The book offered a theory at once simple and profound. Within every species, individuals vary. Some of those variations make survival and reproduction more likely in a particular environment. Over many generations, those favorable traits become more common. Slowly, without intention or foresight, populations change. New forms emerge. Others disappear. From this process, natural selection, came the diversity of life. The force of the idea did not lie in spectacle, but in its logic. Darwin did not need to invoke sudden miracles or fixed designs to explain adaptation. He needed only variation, inheritance, struggle, and immense spans of time. Nature, in his view, was not static. It was restless. It was always selecting, always filtering, always reshaping life through pressures that never fully stopped. The reaction was immediate and often fierce. Some readers recognized the theory as a unifying explanation for the living world. Others saw it as a threat, not just to traditional science, but to religious belief and to humanity's sense of uniqueness. Darwin became the subject of criticism, mockery, and caricature. His ideas were simplified, distorted, and attacked. Yet they were not easily dismissed. The evidence kept accumulating. The explanatory power of the theory kept revealing itself. Darwin himself did not thrive on public battle. He avoided many direct confrontations and left much of the public defense of evolution to allies such as Thomas Henry Huxley. That, too, is part of what makes his story remarkable. He did not conquer through charisma. He did not dominate through rhetoric. He changed the world largely through relentless observation, disciplined thought, and the quiet force of an argument that proved increasingly difficult to escape. Over time, evolution by natural selection became one of the foundations of modern biology. It changed how scientists understood the history of life, the relationship between organisms, and the mechanisms by which species adapt. Its influence now reaches far beyond Darwin's century. It helps explain antibiotic resistance, viral change, selective breeding, ecological adaptation, and the deep genetic connections among living things. What began as a series of careful observations became one of the most powerful frameworks in the history of science. Darwin did not set out to destroy belief or provoke cultural war. He followed evidence where it led, even when the destination was uncomfortable. And in doing so, he changed more than biology. He changed perspective. He showed that life is not fixed, that nature is not frozen, and that humanity is not separate from the living world, but part of its long and continuous history. That was the real shock of Darwin's work. Not simply that species change, but that change is the rule, not the exception. That complexity can emerge without a master plan. That the living world, for all its beauty, is shaped by pressure, variation, survival, and time. Charles Darwin did not just study life, he altered how life itself is understood.